Okay, so here is a WebLogic scripting tool example that creates a managed server. Let's walk through this line by line. So on the first line, we connect to the admin server. Now, in this example, which I pulled from the online documentation, it's a really simple example, but it's not necessarily applicable to our environment. So you can see here that we specified only the username and password. When you leave out the admin server URL and the admin server name, WebLogic scripting tool will default to the default values for those parameters. So the default admin server name is admin server, which is what we would have in our example demo environment. And then the default URL is localhost:7001. So this assumes that you are running this on the host that has the admin server. So let's disregard the connect for a moment, because in reality, we would want to specify our secure admin URL, which would be T3S localhost 9001, and omit username and password. But that aside, once we've connected, we need to switch to the edit mbean hierarchy or mbean tree, and that's line number 2, where we issue the edit command. And so edit changes us from the runtime to the config mbean tree. And then we need to obtain a login edit session, an exclusive edit session. And so that's what the start edit command does. And so once that returns, then this is where the magic happens. So server equals cmo.createServer. Okay, so CMO stands for current managed object. And so as I mentioned, the mbeans are organized like a file system, where an mbean is a directory and the files within that directory are attributes and operations. So when you switch to the domain config mbean hierarchy by issuing the edit command, the CMO object, or the current managed object, is the domain. And the domain defines a set of operations for creating certain resources. And so if you do an LS after you've performed line number 2, edit, you will see all the attributes and all the operations. And so if you were to change directory, if you change from the root directory, which is the domain level, down into a server directory or a data source directory, CMO will represent the data source or the server that you're in, the directory that you're in. Okay, so in line number 4, CMO represents the domain. And the domain has an operation called create server that takes the name of a server. And so to create a managed server, you do cmo.createServer and then pass in the name of that server. The create server command returns an object representing that server. And so that's what the SVR object is. And then the SVR object is assigned to the output from the create server command. So SVR temporarily represents our managed server. It's by temporary, I mean it hasn't been saved yet. It hasn't been persisted. It doesn't exist. It's all in memory. It's all temporary. And so once we have this object that represents our managed server, we can manipulate it. So when we run create server, it returns this SVR object, and that SVR object is of type server mbean type. And a server mbean defines a set of specific operations for a server, as I mentioned during the previous slides where I talked about how there are standard operations and mbean specific operations. Well, you can see here that in lines 5 and 6, we are setting the listen port and the address for the server. So the server mbean type defines these operations for setting the port and address. And line 7 saves all of our changes. And then line 8 actually activates them. So line 8, activate, pushes all these changes out to all the members of the domain. And that block equals true statement basically says to block this command until it completes. So I think by default block is false. So what would happen is that, and if you were creating a script and block were equal to false, as soon as I hit activate, I would proceed with the rest of the script, while the activation would be occurring in the background. Now, if I were making additional changes after I performed an activation, let's say I needed the monitor, I wanted the monitor managed server that I just created. Well, I would only want to monitor it after it had been created. So the block equals true blocks the activate command, blocks the rest of the script executing until activate returns. And so it's a safe thing to do to put this block equals true in there.